Oh, it's recorded, okay.
Good evening. My name is Noel Mills. I'm a senior at Waterloo West High School, a member here at Sacred Heart Parish, and I'm delighted to be sharing my story with you. As a teenager, I constantly struggle with the big question: what's the point? Why do we try so hard? Why do we fight so fiercely? It's easy to say, because we want to make it to heaven, or because we want to please God. And these are valid answers, but we are seeing increasingly significant evidence that these are not sufficient reasons for Generation Z, current high school and college-aged young people. You should know that although I am a devout Catholic, I am also an avid student. I hate not knowing something, and I hate being wrong. Common characteristics of my generation. We need facts and evidence. We need to be able to see, hear, and touch something if you expect us to believe that it's real. We are a promising generation in the sense that we will be curious, adventurous, and innovative, but we will also continue to struggle with concepts beyond our tangible reach. Souls, life after death, God. Research shows that 80% of cradle Catholics are no longer Catholics by the age of 23. And it's easy to see why. We live in an age where there's a scientific explanation for nearly everything. We don't necessarily have to believe in a God to understand how the natural world works. Many of us, myself included, are susceptible to the belief that one has to choose between science and religion. One or the other, but definitely not both. And let me tell you, it is so easy to just choose science. It would be so simple to just give up and choose the proven over the unproven. The reality that requires facts over the reality that requires faith. But I refuse to believe that an institution nearly 2,000 years old, the oldest institution in the Western world, is based on lies. I refuse to believe that the great philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas, Catherine of Siena, Thomas Merton were all wrong. I firmly believe that the fight to find an agreement between science and religion is one worth fighting. I can identify 3 main events in my life that have shaped my personal fight. Please note the word personal, as in this is my personal journey. The lens through which I see Catholicism is mine and mine alone. I have no agenda, but tonight I hope to help you see through my lens and hopefully gain some insight into why young people fall away from their faith and quite possibly what we can do to make them stay. When I was in 4th grade, I was diagnosed with Langerhans cell histiocytosis, an autoimmune disorder that causes lesions to form in the body. The first lesion was right here on my skull. Fortunately, the University of Iowa Hospital has world-class doctors that were able to perform a perfect craniotomy. These doctors were able to save me from my disease, but they were unable to save me from the humiliation that followed. I had to wear a helmet for 3 months after the operation, a helmet commonly associated with mental retardation. I was very realistic even at this young age. And so I don't remember questioning how this happens to me, but I do remember asking why. Why did I, an already socially awkward young girl, have to bear this cross? I wasn't quite old enough to doubt the existence of a God yet, but I was old enough to question his motives. Why did he do this to an 8-year-old girl? Why did he choose me, a weekly mass attendee who sang in the choir and was an altar server? What did I do to deserve this? I would like to say that I prayed every night and received some sort of divine wisdom that helped me get through this situation, but that's not what happened at all. It was my mother, actually, her wisdom that helped me grow through this situation. She taught me that, yeah, life sucks sometimes, but what would be the point of living if we weren't given the opportunity to be strong? I distinctly remember her saying, It is not what happens to us that defines who we are, but rather how we deal with what happens to us. Looking back on this time in my life, I realized that I had two options. I could have accepted the theory that there is no God, because a God of infinite love and mercy would not make a little girl so sick. But I chose the second option. I chose to believe that a God of infinite love and mercy took the opportunity to make a little girl so strong. I credit most of my personality traits to this incident because, in fact, it is such a crucial time in a child's development. No obstacle I encounter can faze me much after having my head cut open. I know now that maybe there isn't a God, and my disease was just a mistake in my genetic sequence. But maybe there is, and he chose me to endure this pain because he needs me to be strong for others. Maybe our struggles in life are purely coincidental, but choosing to handle our struggles with grace is our duty despite the existence of a higher power. Maybe there is a God and we are doing his will here on earth. Maybe there isn't and we are simply trying our hardest to make life a little more bearable. But I say, why do we have to decide? Are these two explanations not, in essence, the same? The word why is a word that will define the future of the scientific field. We know how things happen, but the question now is why things happen. For example, two atoms of opposite charge attract, yes. Why? Because they're friends. I dare to say the search for an explanation to why the universe exists is a search for a God. For now, however, I have decided to believe in something greater than myself because I will not accept that the answer to why is for nothing. 2 years ago, I decided to leave behind my 10 years of Catholic education and transfer to Waterloo West High School. I loved the Columbus community, but I knew that the International Baccalaureate program offered at West High needed to be the next step in my life. If you are unfamiliar with the International Baccalaureate, or IB, just know that it is a rigorous, global education that severely challenges a student's way of thinking. We are taught to question. What do you know? Why do you know it? And why should anyone believe you? This new way of thinking translated into my faith life. It has made me seriously doubt the motive for organized religion. I know the teachings of the Catholic Church. I know them because of sacred scripture, but why should anyone believe it? Why do we believe that God created the world in 7 days? That Jesus made the lame walk and the blind see? That on Judgment Day we will be rewarded for being good Catholics? Faith, they say. When I ask these questions, that is the response I receive. Faith, the strong belief in God or in the doctrines of religion, based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Spiritual apprehension. You see how I struggle with this. I'll admit that at first it was hard to keep my faith alive in an environment that I initially thought was unsupportive of my religion. However, as time went on, I became a little wiser. I realized that having to purposefully and actively seek out opportunities to grow in my faith made it stronger than it ever has been in the past. Ironically, I have become more sure in my faith through doubting it than I ever would have if I had accepted it ignorantly, no questions asked. I don't have Monday morning prayer services and I don't have a monthly mass, but I have the opportunity to see seemingly infinite varieties of life. I see how different we all are, and yet how necessary this diversity is. Last year, I sat at a lunch table with a unificationist, a Muslim, and a couple atheists. These girls, my classmates, my best friends, have taught me more about God than any textbook ever could. We discuss heavy topics such as abortion, physician-assisted suicide, the death penalty, and although we have radically different opinions, we can argue for a full class period and still walk out the door laughing with each other. Tolerance. They force me to question my religion, research it further, dig a little deeper, and then come back with an argument that is stronger than ever. Having to fight for my beliefs is what made me so resolute in my faith. Having to see God in the small things, such as a particularly beautiful sunset, or a particularly kind act from a random stranger. Yes, it is difficult to keep my faith alive when it is not shoved down my throat every day. We have to deliberately choose to seek God and keep seeking him. Maybe he doesn't exist, and our search for him is all for naught. But are these things that we find in our search not worthy regardless? When we appreciate the beauty of nature, when we love others as we love ourselves, maybe there isn't a God, but maybe there is, and he exists in these beautiful things here on earth. Some of you may know a young man by the name of Judgement Madison, and if you don't, you should. I first met Judgement when I was placed in his large group speech ensemble. This was my first year in speech, and so I was extremely reserved during rehearsals. For this reason, I wasn't super comfortable with the people in my group, let alone Judgement, this large, sassy black man whom I had just met. Right before one of our rehearsals one day, we were sitting in the choir room, talking, relaxing, what have you, and I received a phone call from my mom, which was peculiar because she never calls me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I decided to take it. I stepped into a closet, answered the phone, and my mother's tone immediately let me know that something was horribly amiss. I started to panic as I assumed the absolute worst, and unfortunately my instinct was not wrong. My grandmother had unexpectedly passed away, and my little brother had found her dead in her apartment. I began to sob as all of the warmth from my soul seemed to vanish. I was in hysterics by the time Judgement came into the room and asked me what was wrong. I explained that I just found out that my grandma died, and this man whom I hardly knew, this man who was so vastly different from myself, this man who had no obligation in the world to comfort me, embraced me with such assuredness. In that time, as my heart was breaking, I didn't feel alone. I was suffering, but he had the grace to suffer with me. We were only humans in that moment, but he showed me the face of God. And is that not our obligation here on earth? To show others God? What if there isn't a God? Yes, that is a valid question, but what if there is, and he exists in every one of us? Being a scientifically and factually oriented person made it exceptionally difficult for me to believe that my grandmother flew up to a magical place in the sky and was watching over my earthly activities. However, the thought of her laying in the ground forever, her whole life ceasing to exist at the moment of her death, was simply too sad for me to handle. I couldn't comfort myself with the idea that she was in heaven, and yet I couldn't cope with the idea that her whole being was buried under the ground. So I came up with a new theory. A theory that dried my tears and started to put the pieces of my broken heart back together. I realized the only way I could truly, knowingly keep her alive was by living out her legacy. My grandma was incredibly thoughtful and patient with myself and with my cousins. She would always listen with such intensity and offer just a little piece of advice that was just right. I decided I could adopt this trait of hers. I could keep my grandma alive by making people feel like what they have to say is important. What if there isn't a heaven? Well, what if we can't bring heaven here? By being a little kinder, listening a little harder, making each other feel a little less lonely. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. This verse sticks with me because I have devoted myself to my academics. I believe that one of the best ways to praise God and help build his kingdom here on earth is by fully cultivating the gifts and talents that he has given us. Imagine a world in which we all discerned what is the will of God. How beautiful that world would be. This verse uses the word testing, which I find particularly interesting. The Bible invites us to test, to challenge our faith and become stronger through questioning. At the Holy Thursday Mass a couple days ago, I looked around and noticed that no one had taken off their coat. People wore their winter coats, their jackets, their sweaters, all throughout Mass. It's room temperature in the church. There's no reason for us to keep on our outer layers, and yet we do. Why do we do this? It's ridiculous. I found great symbolism in the sense that we don't like to get comfortable with each other. We don't like to ask the difficult questions. We don't like to remove our masks and be honest. We don't like to expose our weaknesses and risk judgment. The act of testing, which Romans asks us to do, is incredibly taboo. As a young Catholic, I don't like this. I don't like that we can't get comfortable enough to discuss our doubts. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 8 states, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." The Bible tells us to test, yes, but it also tells us that at the end of the day, we can't know. We're not supposed to know. This is difficult for everyone, but it is only a caveat, not an excuse for ignorance. So I challenge you to encourage the young people in your life to question. Let them fully accept both science and religion. Let them know that it is okay to challenge their faith, because that is precisely the way that it grows stronger. Take off your coats. Thank you.